My name's Kim Gibbins, and I'm a Stop the War activist. I've been involved in Stop the War activism since 2001, since the September the 11th, when it became clear that America was going to respond by bombing Afghanistan. And since then I've been involved in a local Stop the War group, and we're affiliated to Stop the War Coalition nationally. We've tried to mobilise people locally, lobby our MPs by having petitions, having stalls, having local demonstrations, and mobilising for the big national demonstrations to show opposition to the war. I think I opposed the war instinctively because I think I was quite naive in 2001 when the planes went into the Twin Towers. I was at work and someone across the desk from me at work said, "Oh, America's going to bomb someone for this," and I was like, "Well, no, they're not. What an insane reaction to war! What a insane reaction to what's happened to them, to go and bomb other people." And I think I just saw straight away that it was wrong. I know some people needed the arguments going through and they sort of bought into the sort of bullshit that the media was coming out with about. I think I just saw from the get-go that bombing poor people in Afghanistan, where 99% of the people were peasant farmers, where none of the bombers in the planes had actually come from Afghanistan, they'd come from Saudi Arabia, and that just bombing these people who were already in a massive humanitarian crisis was just morally abhorrent. I mean, at the time, the aid agencies were saying that people would leave their homes, would cause 7 million refugees. They were talking about starvation on like a massive scale, like starvation on the scale that you saw in Africa in the 80s. And to me, it was just so clearly wrong and so clearly the wrong response. But I mean, that was like a personal reaction. But then I met other people who felt the same way. I mean, very quickly, Stop the War Coalition was formed, and within a week of the attacks on the Twin Towers, Stop the War Coalition formed in London, and there were meetings going up and down the country. And I went to one in Birmingham, and I think there was about 100 people at the first meeting, and it was a real eye-opener because there were people there that had been political anyway, and straight away started to talk about the way that the media was manipulating the way people were perceiving what had happened. For example, on September the 11th, the media showed people in Palestine celebrating the attacks on the Twin Towers, but someone stood up in the meeting in Birmingham and said, actually, I can't exactly remember the exact context, but said that, that was just like a couple of people on the street, but when you panned out, like most people didn't. If you panned out the screen, I mean, the media cut frames to show what they want people to see, but most people didn't react like that in Palestine. And it was a way of sort of demonising people in the Arab world and in the Muslim world, and it was a way of preparing us straight away for saying that it's okay to bomb these people. Someone else stood up, Salma Yaqub, became a very key anti-war activist, particularly in Birmingham. She's a Muslim woman, and she said that she'd been spat on in the streets because of what had happened on the day of September the 11th. Someone had actually spat on her in the street, and she had a child with her. And she said, and nobody intervened. Nobody on the streets came up and had a go at the person who'd done that. And she said the response of a lot of people in her community was to retreat and was to hide, and people were very afraid. But she'd taken the decision that she wasn't going to, and she wasn't going to take it, and she wanted to join with other people saying, no, I'm not responsible for this, I'm not going to take this, and I don't accept, the American government's response and the British government's response to bomb other people about this. And I think, the response of the American people as well, which was on the TV at the time, was, "Not in my name" was a big slogan of Stop the War from the beginning, and that came from America, and that came from people who'd lost relatives in the Twin Towers and lost friends in the Twin Towers. A humanitarian response was to say, well, these people have died and it's terrible, but we don't want that response. We don't want a response to that to be other innocent people having their lives destroyed, having their children blown up, having their parents blown up as well. So that was why I was initially drawn into the anti-war movement, and I think the war on terror is affecting us all in lots of different ways. I think one of the main ways it's affecting people like you and me, who, I'm white, professional. I think the way that I'm a teacher. I think the way that it's affecting you and me is in terms of the attacks on our civil liberties. Since the war on terror started, there's been lots of laws that curtail our civil liberties that have been brought in. One of them is the Serious Organised Crime and Police Act, SOCPRO, which stops people demonstrating in Parliament Square unless they get permission from the police within 7 days. The police have to give permission for the demonstration, but they can say how many people are allowed to demonstrate, what your placards can say, how much noise you're allowed to make, what you can wear. Massive curtailing of our liberties. There's been all sorts of bills, like a harassment bill that's come through, which means that the police technically could arrest me for harassing someone, for handing out 2 leaflets to 2 different people, asking them either to do or not do something. That's all been brought in, and that's all part of the whole war on terror thing. It affects you much more, obviously, if you're a Muslim. You're much more likely to be stopped on the streets by the police. Your house is likely to be raided. Lots and lots of Muslims have been arrested under anti-terrorism legislation and then released without charge, but in the meantime their lives are ruined in some cases. I mean, where they arrested 2 Muslims in London a couple of years ago, the police, before they released them, put out lots of smears about paedophilia and stuff on the computer, which they later had to say was totally wrong. But, these people's lives have been, terribly destroyed. The police can arrest you and not charge you now for, I think it's 24 days, and the government wants to put it up to 42 days, which is a massive amount of time to keep someone without charging them. In New York, where they were actually attacked, you can only keep somebody for 7 days without charge. So why in this country do we need to keep people for so much longer? I think it's much more unsafe in this country now. I think we are at a much higher risk of terrorism. But the government knew this when it went into Afghanistan. The government agency said if we go into Iraq, then the likelihood of there being some sort of retaliation on home soil, because let's face it, if you're bombing people, they're much more likely to want to bomb you back. And in fact, the people who bombed London on 7/7 gave that as their reason for the bombing. They said it was because the British government is bombing Iraq. And that means that ordinary people like you and me, who are opposed to the war, who were opposed to the war, are more likely to be blown up, on a tube in London, on a bus in Birmingham, because of what our government has done. So I think those are 2 key ways about why people should make a stand and do something about it. But I think the other reason is that we're spending billions and billions of pounds on bombing other countries when, the government says, well, actually, there's not enough money for that cancer drug for breast cancer, or there's not enough money to have class sizes less than 32, or, there's not enough money to have an integrated transport system. But if we weren't spending billions and billions on waste, on bombing other countries, then there would be that money. It's all about priorities, about where we spend our money. The other way I think it's affecting us and that we should take a stand, you might have to edit this bit, is the waste of young people's lives in this country. I mean, the army goes into the schools and goes into the colleges and even goes into the universities, and it argues with young people about, why they should join the army, and it feeds them a lot of crap, basically, about what life in the army involves. A friend of mine's brother was approached by the army and told that he could be a canoe instructor and that he'd never have to go to war. And we know that this is true. They're sending out, boys of 18 to go to countries where they don't speak the language, where they're not welcome, where they are going to have to kill people or watch people be killed, and putting them in terrible danger. And, it's a waste of their lives, and those lives shouldn't be wasted. There should be proper opportunities for young people. And, and people are coming back, and people are being killed, but hidden behind that, which we don't see, is the massive level of injury. People's limbs are being blown off, people's lives are being totally ruined. They're abandoned pretty much by the army when they get back. I think 1 in 4 homeless people have been in the army. And, that's a total waste as well. It's a total and unnecessary waste.